Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 75th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all. 75, I guess it's another milestone. Crazy. How are we doing here? Well, just, theoretically another 25 and our 100th episode. Should we start planning ahead for the next live one for that? We'll if it comes to it, we'll let you guys know.
That's like 2 years away.
It's 2 years away. Schedules, everyone will be busy. You never know. But yes, if it does happen, we'll let you all know in plenty of advance time, but nowhere near anytime soon. Let's just put it that way. So, but still, the fact we made it this far, thank you all again very much for listening. We absolutely appreciate it. We continue to receive very nice notes and feedback from folks. Got a nice one from a listener on someone who had been listening to us from the beginning on Blue Sky a couple of weeks ago, which is like, oh wow, thanks, sir. So that is really great, and we hope you continue to enjoy it. Meantime, some brief personal news from the Jared front. You're up for another award.
I know it's at this point. It's just whatever. Like, let's list the ones I'm not nominated. No,
Rightly.
Yeah. I am one of the 10 finalists for the Locus Award for Best First Novel.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. I'll find out about that one in a month.
Okay. So this one will be coming up soon, and then the astounding one will be a little bit later in the summer. So as how it all goes down. So, well, I remember last summer we were doing episodes about to be launched into the world, and now here you are. Ain't it amazing? So
here I am.
Astounding, even. So, as it were. So again, as we will tell you all, if you haven't read it, come on, why? Or if you haven't listened to it being read, there's a perfectly good spoken word version out there. You can do that too. So,
there's an ebook.
Yeah.
There we go.
Or just buy it and don't read it. I don't care. I just need sales.
Yeah. Set it on fire. Just send Jared the money. Don't even read it.
Buy it and leave it in a little free library.
There you go. See, do good things for yourself and do good things for the people around you. We need more of that in this life, especially this year. Well, we could dwell on that. Let's move on. There is some news, and it was so important that I almost literally forgot about it until right as we were saying to record, and Ori said, is there a news section? I was like, oh my God. Well, here it is, and if it sounds rushed, it is. But Jared, as always, do please take it away.
Yeah, adaptation news time once again here on By-The-Bywater, and we wish we could be excited about it. Oh well. But more seriously, as announced in Variety and from there in other publications, Warner Brothers has shifted the date for the Andy Serkis starring and directed The Hunt for Gollum to December 2027. This makes sense. It's almost nothing but speculation, and rumors have been swirling around about it since it was first announced, as opposed to any actual concrete news like filming. And while there's still not much out there to draw on, presumably we'll start hearing more details soon, whether we like it or not. Speaking of mixed emotions, Deadline had a piece featuring a couple of the actors from The Rings of Power, including Charlie Vickers, who plays Sauron, and Daniel Wayman, who plays Gandalf, with some comments about what they're sensing is coming up for them in the third season, which is all well and good, but frankly, it'll all be down to the showrunners and what they get told to do, and, well, there's a reason we didn't cover the second season, and good luck, everyone. Hope the check's clear.
The best we can offer. I don't want to. I resist quoting the actors in that, because they're the actors. They're just doing fine, and they're doing things like this. They're doing what they can. I'd love to pick the showrunners' brains, but as they appear to be made of tapioca, I don't want to. So,
I would,
just nothing there. Nothing. As for The Hunt for Gollum, great. Sure. Why not?
I still am like, why? Who asked for this? I mean, Andy Serkis probably. I don't. But like,
I guess.
But also, he's doing other things. I don't know. It's kind of. I don't know. It's not like the man has not had like a long, fulfilling career that is still going. He could direct like any other thing that he wanted to, probably.
Yeah, I mean, he's directed other films. He directed that second Venom film and other stuff along the way. He's got that school that he set up precisely for mocap acting, which is, kind of actually, smart thing. You might as well have the guy found it because things like that. So, although, given how AI is going further and things like this, one wonders. But this will be just something we just will have to go like, okay, enjoy. Rights holders are happy, I guess. And we'll see where it goes.
Having fun.
Yeah, fine. Have fun playing away over there. We'll talk about when we do if we have to. Notice I said if as opposed to when.
Yeah.
So we will play that one.
It's so funny. I think one of us has probably said this before, and I can't remember right now. But there was a point where it would have been like, oh my god, more Tolkien stuff. That's amazing. I'm so happy, so excited to have more to watch. And now I'm just like, stop.
Yeah.
Can we tap the brakes, please?
Well, anyway, we do have other things to talk about, though.
We did.
Then, thankfully, that's the chief topic around, and it's Jared's choice of topics. So let's concentrate on happy things, and we'll turn it over to you.
So, sometimes you read a book and you're like, man, I gotta draw this. Of course you do, because you've listened to our episode on fan art. And today we're talking about one of the most impressive pieces of Tolkien fan art, the Atlas of Middle-earth. So sometime in the early 70s, it's weird, like there's different accounts of what year she actually read it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Karen Wynn Fonstad was given Lord of the Rings, and she read it, and reread it, and reread it. A recent New York Times obituary that we've linked to before quotes her as writing in her journal, "I doubt if any other book or books will ever grasp my interest as much as these. Each time I finish a reading, I immediately feel as if I hadn't read them for weeks, and I am lonely for them, lonely for the characters within the books, the tremendously vivid descriptions, the whole essence." But it wasn't until the Silmarillion came out in 1977 that she had the idea for the Atlas. Fonstad had a background in map making. Her master's thesis was a style manual for cartographic symbology, which I feel like I need to track down.
Yeah.
I want to look at that. And when she contacted Tolkien's U.S. publisher about the idea for the Atlas, she just happened to reach his editor, who loved this so much that she got the estate's permission within like days, I want to say. And the Atlas itself was a huge undertaking, as you can probably tell from reading it, or from the fact that it's a atlas. These aren't, the work of an afternoon. But she wasn't content to map just the main stuff like Gondor and the Shire or whatever. She zooms out to a macro level. She's got a few world maps in there, like the flat world and then the round world, like all and then she zooms back into a very micro level, like down to like layouts of Bag End itself, theoretical layouts. Anyway, and this would all be a lot of work. That is so much drawing. Like, I'm just tired. When I was flipping through it for this, I was like, oh my god, I would have given up a quarter of the way in. But she goes a step further. Like, what geological and climatic forces have shaped Middle-earth? She has theories. Like guessing that the White Mountains may be heavily glaciated limestone and igneous rock, with Minas Tirith perched atop a pier of ancient igneous rock left by an eroded volcano, or spending much more time on the geology of the Emin Muil than anyone might have thought possible.
True.
I love her, honestly. So when Christopher Tolkien started putting out the History of Middle-earth volumes, Fonstad realized she needed to update the Atlas, so a revised edition did come out in 1991. The Atlas wasn't really expanded. Fonstad explains in her foreword this would have meant completely redesigning the book and doubling its length. So the History of Middle-earth was mostly used to correct and otherwise update it. I want to say something like a third of the maps are new, and the text is apparently fully revised, but I couldn't get my hands on the original to compare it to. And this is all done with the estate's knowledge and blessing, so the revised edition is often considered the closest to an authoritative atlas that we'll ever get. Now, I chose this topic initially because that New York Times obit put the book at the front of my mind. I was given a copy for Christmas like 20 years ago or something, or maybe longer, I don't know. I'm old. And I read it once, like when I was given it, but I haven't picked it up since. And, it's a landmark of Tolkien scholarship. It seems important to cover it. But honestly, looking at it again, I'm kind of seeing why I haven't gone back to it. The people are going to get so mad at me, I think, for the rest of this introduction.
Go ahead.
But I'm sorry, I have to speak my truth. There's a lot to appreciate here. There is so much to appreciate here, but it feels redundant to me. Like, most of the maps are kind of just zooming and enhancing pre-existing work. I don't feel like they add anything to my understanding of Middle-earth. Is this a hot take? It sort of feels like one. I don't know. I think the discussions of geology and climate are fascinating, but I'm not sure I actually see the utility of the atlas itself, which puts me in a weird place, because normally I, unlike some people, Ned, tend to pick things I think we'll have a good time talking about. But with the atlas, I'm left with the impression of it being a lot of like dedicated, really intelligent work without really much to show for it. Again, speaking mostly of the maps, because I could have stood to hear a lot more about karst landscapes in Ithilien or whatever. I love that stuff. I love that so much. But the thing is, like, she's making up a lot here. I respect the hustle. I wish somebody would pay me to make a map of Nargothrond or whatever, which is like a place so like, it's so barely described. You can basically just do anything with it. But that's, for me, that's kind of the problem. The things I most want visualized are the things we know the least about. So Fonstad is doing a ton of filling in gaps. She's extremely clear about the evidence she's using and what stuff she's inserting herself, but it's still a little bit like using frog DNA to get a viable embryo. In the end, what you've got isn't really a dinosaur. So what is its utility as a resource? So please, like, first, right out of the gate, everybody has to tell me I'm wrong or what I've missed, because I don't want to sit here going meh. And before anyone says anything, I absolutely intend no disrespect to Fonstad herself, who is a massively talented and intelligent artist. My beef, it's so slight, it's more like veal, is really just that I don't see how useful the atlas actually is.
Oh, well.
For me, I don't know. I feel so bad.
Don't feel bad. Well,
Jared, you owe me $25 because I had to go buy this book.
truth comes out.
But like, does it add for you? For me, it doesn't add anything to my understanding of Middle Earth. But for you two, does it add to it? Does it complicate it? Does it undermine it? Does it do anything for you?
Ned, you go first.
Me? Okay. Well, for me, this is, you could say, historically situated history, at least in a personal sense, because of when it came out and when I first read it and when I first got to it. So, as I've said many times before, for me it was the early 80s, specifically Christmas 83, when I properly read Lord of the Rings and everything, fully finally clicked, having already read The Hobbit a number of times, etc. And around that time, being a precocious short and also not realizing some of the stuff behind it and all the rest of it, I took great comfort in the idea that there was this thing called Mensa that one could join because it was for smart people. I think we all know about how IQ is a loaded situation right now. So remember, you have to go up in time and take different perspective on things. So
it's and all made that. Up, and the points don't matter.
Mm-hmm. What is the scale? Anyway, so theoretically gifted as I was, blah blah blah. So I joined, and I saw that there are various little interest groups that one could join in official zines, things like this. One of which was, and I think is still running, I haven't checked in a while, but was very important to me throughout the 80s and into the 90s, was Beyond Bree, which was a monthly zine, and a very well put together one, edited by Nancy March, very friendly person. I always liked her. So, anyway, what happened was, the very first issue of it I got, it's a fanzine. We're talking about a classic, 70s, 80s, Xeroxed, fanzine type thing. Very well put together, it has to be said. It was always very nicely laid out in terms of the combination of, the typing, the art, the full 8.5 by 11 pages, sort of folded up into a newsletter thing you carefully opened up, and usually about 12 pages or so, or just 6 sheets of paper both sides, that type of thing. And the first thing I got of the very first issue I got was talking about, again, it would be interspersed with very more serious things like studies of the history of Middle Earth books as they were coming out. Christina Skull, who has become one of the most well-known Tolkien researchers, for instance, did these definitive reviews of the books as they came out, which were very helpful in sort of looking into the detail and things like that. Time kind of blew me away when I'm only 13, going like, oh, there's a lot here. I bring all this up because what happens is that that very first issue had, as a sort of little fun fill-up, because you have humor pieces, things like this, the idea of what if you went to Middle Earth and it was like a package tourist thing, you flew in and you flew out like you were going somewhere on vacation to see the historical sites, okay, whatever. It's obviously just, a little mix and match thing. Anyway, the illustrative thing showing the route was this thing from this map, and it said, create a map from the Atlas of Middle Earth by Karen Wynn Fonstad, and I'm like, what is this? And remember, I'm in the first flush of really taking in Lord of the Rings, and soon thereafter the Silmarillion too. And I'm like, there's an atlas? Oh, wow. And from my perspective, too, all I had in terms of maps at the time were the paperback-sized editions of the maps. Because The Hobbit, I had my mom's hardcover, but that's just, the basic map of Wilderland, essentially. And the map of the Lonely Mountain. For Middle-earth maps or Lord of the Rings, it's these, very small, it's Christopher Tolkien's, slightly shrunk down version of the map, but again, packed into paperback form where you can only see so much. And that's about it. But I'm like, there's a whole atlas out there where you can see more, and it looks So I remember specifically asking it for my birthday in March '85 and getting it, and it was a hardcover version because it was only available in hardcover then of the first edition. And again, I had nothing else like this. And it blew my mind. I was just sort of like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And for me, it was one of those things that, certainly it was showing me a lot of stuff I already knew, but did so in a way that was distinctly different in terms of appearance. It introduced all these wonderful extra factors, as you say, the geologic maps, the linguistic maps even, things like this, talking a bit more about the theories and things like that underpinned everything. And again, this is material up through Unfinished Tales. So it included a nicely redrawn map of Numenor, since that had just appeared, stuff like that. And it was sort of like foundational document time type thing like that. And for me, it was one of those things that I read and reread many, many times over the next, you could say, 20 years, really. And around that time, she had also started publishing her other atlases for other creative works out there, for Anne McCaffrey's Pern, Stephen R. Dawson's The Land, and eventually 2 separate ones for 2 D&D worlds, for Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms. And she also changed her styles slightly with the rest of that in terms of the layouts, and things were, still there. But she was also able to, she changed with a more calligraphic way of writing the letters, so it was sort of like, oh, it's even fancier now. And I just really liked it. I always looked forward to seeing a new book of hers, and I really loved the atlas where it all began. So for me, it was like, it was essentially something key for me that allowed me to see what Middle-earth was like in much more detail, thanks to all these additional maps and drawings. And again, of the original edition, I should note, there are distinct differences between the 2 editions. I still have the original edition around somewhere, although a lot of it is carried over into the new edition. It's really more elaboration than anything else for the most part. And for me, it just sort of sunk in deep. It's sort of like, I'm trying to think, I've said this before, I believe the only other book that I pretty much took that was, like, you could say, a fan work that I took in as much would have been Robert Foster's Complete Guide to Middle-earth, which was, at the time, the best concordance to everything out there in terms of, okay, this is where this is mentioned in what edition, and sort of, cross-reference and things like this. So they were very 80s specific print tools, as opposed to the more online ones that we expect these days from things like Tolkien Gateway and the Encyclopedia of Arda and all that. And something like the Encyclopedia of Arda and the other maps that are out there sort of like, change your idea of sort of what's going on with this, visualizing it. So I will say, in conclusion, I could go on, rereading it here was the first time I'd done a concentrated reread in a long, long time. I couldn't tell you the last time I have done it. That would have been sometime well in the past. And I'm certainly glad I have it around, and this is a revised edition, and was very happy to reread it. I found myself taking more time with it than I expected. I didn't blaze through it quite happily as I did before. It was one of those things sort of like, taking in all the stuff that was sort of like, sort of elaborated versions of, you could say, retelling the chronologies or other things like this, sort of the text that was accompanying a lot of the maps. And it was sometimes a bit of I don't want to say a slog, I wouldn't say that, but it was one of those things sort of like, it's almost sort of like we're packing in all this detail here before we even get to the maps in some cases. It's sort of like, can't we see the maps first and then get the detail? I sort of wonder. A
little bit of like a recipe blog approach to
almost. It's
to cartography.
In a way. Now you put it that way. It's sort of like, let me be knocked out by the images first and then read the supporting details, that sort of thing. So there was that. But I still think it's quite remarkable. I still think it's extremely remarkable that, unlike the other atlases that she did, where she was able to talk with everybody who had created them, these worlds, whether they were D&D folks or the individual authors, she had to pretty much, in Tolkien's case, she really had to go with what was written, what was there, nothing more. And to be able to elaborate all that is, I think, a really fascinating effort still. And it's something that I will have more to add on that, but it's one of those things that I'm still impressed by it ultimately, and it had an impact on me very much so because of its relative uniqueness at the time, and that's kind of where I will leave it there. I think it is something that you encounter it now. I think the context is a lot different, and I think people would look at it with a lot different expectations. So it is very much a product of its time ultimately, and maybe should be seen more as that more than I had realized until I had reread it.
Yeah, I was I was kind of shocked at how little this helped me. I was really anticipating
yes,
that this would be huge for someone like me who has a very difficult time taking text, descriptive text, and forming an image in my mind. That's pretty. I can do the reverse, but that way in particular is very challenging for me. And yet these maps just kind of keep sliding off my brain. I don't know if it's because there's like too much detail and in too small, like there's too much information in too small an image. Like, you know, I look at like some of the pathways and I'm just like, oh, like I actually have an easier time, you know, understanding from just the text rather than this. And I don't know why. I don't know what the deal is. 'Cause it's beautiful, but I don't know what's wrong with my brain. It just keeps sliding off.
I think for me, part of why I don't find some of the maps particularly memorable is that they really are rehashing ones that already exist, particularly maps of Gondor or Mordor or whatever. We already have those. We have the topographic maps even in the back of Return of the King. It's not doing enough new stuff for me to like file it as an interesting thing in its own right. At least like some of the maps I remember pretty clearly, like the map of Gondolin, which again, and this is where I take issue with people describing it as authoritative or a useful reference, because it's her fan art. And this is not to knock fan art. I love fan art. I draw fan art. It's just that it is her interpretation of a description of the city of Gondolin and treating it as a reference work for stuff like that. That's where I'm like, I don't know. Like, you're just kind of looking at somebody's fan art and saying that it is telling you something about the text that the text already tells you, because she's going off of what we're going off of. Yeah. She doesn't have any information that we don't have, which is why I find so many of the maps unmemorable. Whereas the text, I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about how like what geologic forces could have pushed up the Misty Mountains. Like, why are the Blue Mountains lower? Why is it like that kind of like? I love that. I think that's the most as I said in the introduction, this is the most interesting stuff that this book is doing, because she's actually providing information that I didn't already have. Even if it is just guesswork, it still is doing something more than just like, here's another map of Mordor. You've already seen Mordor. What if you saw it again, but this time with red? Like that's not enough for me. I don't consider that useful.
Yeah, I think also having so many of these, like when I am reading The Lord of the Rings, I do make use of the maps in the book, but to have it so divorced from the context of the story surrounding it, these maps, maybe if they were like literally stuck in between the pages of the actual narrative, would maybe be a bit more like, oh, okay, this is like sticking, and this is actually like an aid that I could really use, but divorced from the story, this just makes me want to go read.
Right?
And it's hard. It's hard to sit in bed and have like two books open at the same time, especially a book of this size.
It's a big book.
It's
I mean, I think something we should tell people: we're not trashing this. We're
no, it's an incredible. It's such an incredible work of love, a true labor of love.
Right.
She spent, I want to say, 2.5 years drawing this. There's, I think it's the article from Wisconsin Public Radio or something that shows like the big map that she used kind of to like trace as reference, and it covers like half, like an entire wall or something like that. I would never trash this. This is a labor of love from somebody who loves the exact same stuff I do.
I think one of the things that maybe to sort of like ways to sort of how I appreciated it too is that we have of course very much talked about cartography in Middle Earth before. In fact, we have a episode on both land and a separate one on cartography. We'll obviously link those in the show notes. So in ways this is deriving out of all that. Speaking for myself, I don't know about you two guys. You can chime in. I was always a map and atlas fiend from when I was a kid. So this is something I would say when I was like 4 or so was when I got my first kid scale but world atlas now, and just remember, what are these places? What is this stuff? And just really fascinating. And it was designed for a kid audience, but it was an accurate current map, current atlas, and it was great. I had it for a number of years there when I was still early primary school. And then I remember around when I was 8, and this may be important in terms of how I sort of took in this atlas, is when I got my first historical atlas. And I really loved that, the sense of, things in the past and charts and explanations about how things were. It's sort of like more socio-political as opposed to quote-unquote natural world type stuff. But that soon followed the idea of, there was this thing called Pangea, and this is what people think all the continents look like smashed together. This is fascinating. So you could say that there was a part of me that was always primed for this kind of thing. And when I say the historical atlas thing, that actually has a deep relevance since so much of it is meant to be a historical atlas, a history of Middle Earth, granted, but it really is trying to show what happened over the course of literally thousands of years, and of course uncounted time before the years gets formally counted. So to my mind, some of the stuff that I think I enjoy a lot is the stuff around the central narrative points. So in other words, if we can take, say, a key narrative point that we all know about is, the original fall of Sauron, when Elendil dies, Isildur cuts the ring, etc. We have that as an anchor, but everything between that and the time of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is this, scope of thousands of years of time. And we see Fonstad doing her best to outline, well, how big was Gondor's empire exactly? How did Arnor configure itself? Where did it fall? What does this all mean? Or the various waves of, perceived invasions, essentially drawing all the stuff from the tale of years, granted, but putting it into a sort of this is how one way to visualize everything that happened. And that part, I respond to that. I guess is the best way to put it. It's sort of like, oh, wow. Of course, as time has gone on, you realize that historical atlases themselves have their own limitations. You're trying to create sweeping stuff or all these things and sort of these, big things, a big arrow pointing someplace is translated for a migration of peoples. Well, that's not quite how it works in real life. So,
they all went along that one path.
Yeah, things like that. But it's meant to be a representation of it. And I will say, I always found, I don't want to say unintentionally funny, but it is pretty hilarious when you see the atlas of Aragorn, the army marching up to the Black Gate, and you see this small thin little arrow marching up versus a huge black arrow of everything waiting at the Black Gate. Yeah. It's like a little comedic, but I get the point.
I think, thinking back about what you were saying in the beginning about it, being kind of valuable because it was pre-internet, and I was so excited when I got it. Opened it. It was like, oh my god, the atlas. Oh, this will teach me so much. Because I have always loved maps and atlases and learning things about lands and peoples and stuff like that. And I feel like I keep beating this dead horse, but the reason that I haven't fallen in love with the atlas the way I ever wanted to was it didn't feel like it was teaching me something. So that's maybe I'm accidentally working out some 20-year-old grievance here, disappointment with a Christmas present. But I think that's why it just kind of hasn't really ever resonated with me, is that it didn't teach me anything that I couldn't have gotten myself from reading the Tale of Years. It's this is where Arnor split into 3 kingdoms. I don't feel like I need to see the borders of them, because that doesn't to me, that unless Tolkien is saying this, has told her, and he couldn't have told her, but unless he said this is how it looked, what is the value of it as a reference work? And it is recommended often as a reference work, and I don't know why. I welcome theories.
I am trying to wrestle with my own inability to look at these maps that have been crafted so carefully, and why am I not capable of retaining any of this. And I did not have this as a kid. This is my first experience with this material, and I'm trying to I think I'm getting dumber. But also wiser. I don't mean that I have reached the age I'm creeping towards 40, and I think it's that time where you become less able to process new information. This is the information is not new, but it looks new. But I'm better able to synthesize old information, which is where sort of the wisdom comes from. And that's got to be what's happening here, right? But Jared, you also it's just not doing it for you. And I don't know. I feel bad, but yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there is just too much going on in most of these.
It's possible.
I don't know. Looking at some of these, I'm there's too many arrows. There's too many words. It's not big enough. Some of it is just maybe a little too detailed, the path that the Wayne writers took to enslave Rovanian and just I don't know, man. I need a narrative to follow, and with some of the stuff where there isn't really much of a narrative other than this thing happened, I think that makes it really difficult to see the value in someone breaking it down for us like this. I think it's why I also I am not good at looking at maps of military engagement. I don't know. Do either of you have you looked at maps of World War I and II and the sort of troop movements? Because I have tried and it never works for me, which should have been that was foreshadowing for this, I think.
Well, as we all know, boys liked military stuff, and anyway. Slightly more seriously, that's interesting. My dad, among other things, I should know my dad was in the military, so you could argue he has a particular interest. But one of the things he has had interest in is Civil War stuff, and there is a particular 1-volume history of the Civil War that I believe came out as part of the 100th anniversary of the conflict. There was a lot of things like that in the early to mid 60s, and this particular volume had represented battles in a particular way, which was that it was a case where it's showing individual events on a day sort of all happening at once type thing, which sometimes has to happen when you're doing that thing. But instead of doing it as simply arrows on a page type thing, the idea was you were at an elevated perspective. Let's say you happen to be in a balloon looking over the battlefield, and it was very artistically rendered, showing individual soldiers and movements as opposed to just big clumps moving through these actual landscapes. So it was an interesting way to visualize this. I've never really seen anything quite like that in terms of military actions and how they're portrayed visually, at least from that time. So that's an idea of something that's sort of that's a way to giving me a sense of it. It's not truly realistic, but it's more than it might be otherwise type thing. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, I'm not one to like the study of war to like the study of war. Never truly been my thing. So it's one of those things that when I see about this is the X maneuver and they did the pincer around there, and I'm like, that's great.
Good for them.
Cool.
That's lovely, but I can't say I care.
Yeah. I've never cared about military engagements either, the mapping of them or whatever. Ironically, to walk back some of my previous negativity, this is one of the rare instances where I think it would be useful as a reference, because if you have a hard trouble, oh my god, if you have a hard time following the Battle of the Pelennor Fields as written, she's got a map for you that can show you where people were moving, what directions they were coming from, where everything is happening. That's useful. I will say that that's where I suppose it has utility as a reference work. But ironically, those are the parts I care about the least, so I don't look at them. The one thing I would consider helpful, and I'm I don't need that because I already perfectly visualized it in my mind, floating on my Lotus or whatever. Yeah.
To sort of throw in something, the idea of sort of like, helping to render things, I think one of her most distinct things she does is a bit of actual, detective work with the text. And that is trying to figure out exactly how Frodo and Bilbo's individual journeys sync up when it comes to where the trolls are. And she spends a little bit of time on this, pointing out that if you go by the description in The Hobbit, and then you look at the description in Lord of the Rings, and she's like, well, wait a minute, this makes it seem like Aragorn was barely moving and doing anything for like 6 whole days when he was trying to get away from the Nazgul, just going like a mile a day, leading the hobbits up and around and all that. Whereas the text made it seem like, Bilbo and the dwarves came, they found the trolls right over there and just got to them immediately. She's like, this is weird. So she posits what an alternate reading of that would be. She puts in both versions of it in the atlas, or like, go with one, go with the other, and doesn't truly try to nail it down. But she does also include things like referencing the attempt to rewrite The Hobbit that Tolkien did, where he just sort of made a little more, tried to sort of sync things up, and how he eventually did abandon that too. So it's interesting to see that at work. It's a nice admission saying, hey, this isn't definitive, because there was no definitive answer. There is no final one here. And I like the fact that she took the time to actually represent that, as opposed to saying it's clearly this. So I think, you could argue could she have done more with that? Maybe, but at least she did it in this particular case, and I thought that was kind of interesting. It's a nice little way to sort of like, look, this is an imagined landscape. We're doing our best with what we've got. There is no one actual answer. I can't go there to tell you what it's like and go to where the stone trolls are and go like, oh, it's right here. It's sort of like,
Can't ask the author either.
Yeah, can't ask the author. It just simply is.
There are very few points in this atlas where I would say she should have done more.
Yeah, no, I
she's already doing the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't. It's really fascinating we've all been so taken by something that we had to draw it, write more in that world, etc., etc. But this is like,
make them kiss in my fanfic or whatever.
Just a little bit. But this is maybe the most obsessive, complimentary.
Right.
This is maybe like the most obsessive fan work I think I have seen. I'm going to say yes. I don't know. Feel free to bring up other examples.
I mean,
it's absolutely up there.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think of something that would be even vaguely close to it, and the one sort of example up to my mind. Again, we're talking 80s fandom, and this was not the first thing in this particular universe that had been created for that. But I think sort of a key one, and ironically interesting, on language, in terms of, you could say, creative fan work in the 80s specifically, was for the Star Trek universe when Mark Okrant, based simply off of James Doohan's invention of what a Klingon language would be like, specifically for Star Trek the Motion Picture, which I always love. Literally just a small scene of a few lines, and Doohan was the one who came up with that. And Arkman's like, let's expand that out and create the Klingon dictionary. And believe me, that thing was how can I put it? That thing was a hit in high school. I still remember friends of mine carrying their copies around and reading that thing. That was huge. And that's kind of the same level of obsessiveness. And again, we're talking about somebody who had his own training, like Tolkien, Mark Okrant's philologist. He's like, okay, what if you could? And sort of basically, and it became a foundational book for conlang in a very broad sense, the idea that you could do that. And Okrant and Fonstad, in their own particular technical ways, again, you can't really, I mean, you can and have. There's been plenty of research done on Tolkien's own languages, but he's already created them. It's more like the elaborations, whereas Okrant was literally just, okay, let's actually do something with this. And both Okrant and Fonstad are classic examples of people who are trained in their fields. Quote the classic Tolkien line, artists want to know about more of the art, geologists want to know about geology, that classic line. We see it happening here, where in the absence of, in this case, Tolkien's no creator, but both of them are going like, okay, we're bringing our skills to bear, and this is the text. Subtext themselves. This does not make any sense. How the hell do we standardize this, or how the hell do we make this actually clear? And when Jared brings up, the idea of trying to make the geology fit, and sort of explain things. Why does the Emmy look the way it does, or how could it look the way it does? How could these downs actually exist? What does center around this? How do we explain these moments here? I mean, I think her most artful thing is basically trying to explain why Mordor exists as it does. I don't think she quite pulls it off. She's like, well,
what if this happened? Sure. I will say that I've probably mentioned this before, but I have this very strong memory of reading somewhere like authoritative, if like Tolkien's actual writing, that Mordor has like the mountains are actually artificially raised by Sauron.
Mm-hmm.
I strongly remember reading that somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I go to research that and see, it's like, no, I can't find that anywhere, and I don't know where that comes from.
I also
don't know if
have
I
that
accidentally
memory,
made
though.
that up.
I also have that memory. Where is this a weird Mandela effect thing?
Right.
I mean, we know Morgoth does it. That's explicitly said. Sauron, no, Sauron doesn't happen. Yeah, no.
If you had, before I tried actually like finding a source for this, if you had asked me, I would have said perfect confidence, oh yeah, he wrote somewhere that Sauron raised the mountains and that's why it's a rectangle.
We all know it, so we can create a tattoo and put it in a thing. That's what Rings of Power told us. Anyway.
That is still the stupidest
I forgot
thing
about that.
in a show full of stupid decisions. That freaking map thing is still one of maybe the top 2 stupidest. Anyway,
let's move on to happier things. Let me bring up a little bit of extra context thanks to some volumes I have over here. Probably will show the left of my session. Again, dear listeners, you're not going to be able to see this as I bring this up the show, but I will be talking about these. So I believe we mentioned this to some degree in our cartography episode. I could be wrong, but it's also good to sort of take a little bit of thought and history in terms of the depiction of Middle-earth beyond Tolkien's and then Christopher's redrawn maps for the text in terms of what was done out there. The first major one that I can think of was one that Tolkien actually did work on, and that was Pauline Baines's map of Middle-earth that she did in the late 60s, early 70s for a poster, a drawn version of Middle-earth with a couple of extra details that were not in the initially published map of Middle-earth in the Lord of the Rings. So something that he was able to say, oh yeah, you want to add this, put that in there. And so that would have been, for a lot of people, to do something would have been like, oh, okay, this can be a definitive map now, because it is something, again, Tolkien approved. It's his favorite illustrator, etc. So that's something that's notable in its own right. And that would again lasted for, a good 10 years or so as sort of a definitive source. The interesting thing to my mind has always been the fact that there were not one, but 2 separate atlases of Middle-earth published in the same year. 1981, and this is the other one, Journeys of Frodo. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard about this one.
I hadn't heard about it until doing research for this episode, and I was like, "What? There's another one."
There is another one, and this one is interesting because it is unlike, as opposed to Fonstad's, American author, Barbara Strachey, if that's pronounced her last name, is British, and this is much more a British publication, and it was published by Allen and Unwin. Over in the UK, so it is considered, you could say, legit. In fact, if you go in and sort of read the opening thing, it's like it talks about things like books by J.R.R. Tolkien. It lists all the various publications and things like this. Now, the thing is, this is more the Journeys of Frodo is more consciously a work of fan art. In fact, it says right on the back, Strachey was an author. She had written on a couple of literary things and all that, and she had enjoyed the work, and much like Fonstad, just gone into drawing her own maps. It says right here on the back, Barbara Strachey is not a cartographer or a professional artist. She has known and loved the books since they first appeared and long wanted fuller, more detailed maps to go with them. Finally, she decided to create them herself. Now, I'll hopefully be able to link in show notes some of what it looks like, but this might give you a quick representation. This is sort of like, the hobbits going through the wood. And again, it's the Journeys of Frodo. It's specifically Lord of the Rings, Lincoln Path things, but I'll hold this up so if you have a chance to see it right here. So this gives you an idea of what her style is like. And as you can see, it is distinctly different from Fonstad's. It is something that, the art is predominantly red and black, essentially. Kind of, to a degree like the Atlas, but its own specific thing. The idea is there are charts. It's supposed to be just drawing out things. And that gives you an idea of sort of what her goal is. And the layout, and again, here's another one. This is like going to Rivendell. Again, her representation, there's the path to Rivendell. And holding it over. The idea is you lay this thing flat, and you have the words on one side and the portrayal on the other. So the idea is like, okay, it's this section, and here's the map with it. So, whoops, maybe a better view there. Sorry about that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like what she's trying to do with that. And it's interesting because it is an alternate way to do the same thing. Yeah. And her scope is nowhere near as wide. And again, she's not, as she says, a trained person to do this. But personally, I think she does a good job. I think it's nice enough for what it is. It functions differently, and it's telling its own version of the story. But I like it. It's just a nice little sort of thing. You do get a sense of like hand hand-drawn maps. Like here's her Lorien map right here. Sort of see how that goes. And I don't mind the sense of style with it. I don't mind her approach. I've barely looked at it in comparison to Fonstad's over the years. I forget where I got my copy of this, and I don't think it's ever been reprinted or updated. It's kind of a one-off, but it's kind of interesting. The other thing I'll bring up, and I'll just hold up the box here, and this is the Brian Sibley, John Howe, the Maps of Middle-earth collection that came out a few years ago, which basically draws together, it's kind of like, after, it's sort of like Howe was sort of the next one after Baines to do big poster style size maps. And in this case, he did ones for literally everything, pretty much. So he did one for Lord of the Rings, for The Hobbit specifically, for Silmarillion, for Beleriand, and then also one of Numenor. And and there's nothing new being added to any of them. It's more merely a big John Howe stylized, portrayal of land atlas style, along with Brian Sibley providing a lot of particular notes. It's nice. It's interesting. It's nowhere near, again, anywhere as crazy detailed as Fonstad's, but I like it because in the same way that Pauline Baines has had little illustrative moments from the text throughout the ages of hers, she does the same here with his, and I kind of like seeing some of his representation of particular Silmarillion moments. I rather like his depiction of what the entrance to the Angordrum was like. It's like, brooding, things like that. So it's kind of interesting to sort of see representations of things like that. So I like thinking of, to sort of tie all this up, it's good to be reminded that that it's not just Fonstad out there. There are and there have been essentially officially sanctioned other versions of the map or other maps and things like this over time. So we don't necessarily need to think, for all the claims that it is authoritative. It is. Christopher Tolkien very much liked the Atlas. He said so. He was quoted as saying so, and it has a certain pride of place, and it's been very much, it's been published by the same firm, etc. But it's not the only thing. And it's useful to keep that in mind. There can be other versions of that, and we've seen with the modern, internet, drawing versions, there are those, and there'll be more to come. There'll be plenty more to come.
I'm curious, Oriana, what would have made it work for you?
I don't know. Okay, Ned, you held that up, and it actually triggered. I think I've seen. What was her name that you were
Barbara
just
Strachey, The Journeys of Frodo. Yes.
I feel like I have seen those.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, where, when, like those I do feel like I remembered and enjoyed. But I think because the scope was just a little more narrow. Maybe that's what this is like there's just too much information that she is attempting to convey in these images, and I think that's probably it. Maybe just a little
just
less,
pull back a little.
Yeah, a little bit. Even like it makes sense that the mountains and the ridges and there's all these folds and stuff, but that's a little overwhelming. I'm such a baby. This is like what a baby. No one should listen to me or my opinion on things like this. I think I feel like that's the episode title.
You need like A is for Arnor.
Babies first.
There we go. B is for Beleriand.
Babies
first, Middle Earth.
It'd be cool to have. This is insane, but like transparent sort of cells that you can layer over. Yeah. That would be really cool, I think.
I cannot remember what book it was, but I have seen that kind of thing done.
Way.
So
yeah, that rings a bell too. I think I've seen that.
I want to say it wasn't House of Leaves, but it was a similar kind of thing where there are all these. I cannot remember what it was. I wish I could, and if I remember, I will. Get Ned to put it in the show notes.
You know what I also love? This is just going back to maps instead of the more specific atlas that we are talking about. But man, like a sort of medieval style series of maps of Middle Earth with all the little guys.
All the
little guys.
Medieval little guys.
Yeah.
That would be great. Kind of like the various sort of pieces of map-ish that are in the West Passage, which I love.
I'm still mad that hardly anyone has said, maybe more people have picked up on it than I think, but hardly anyone has said that they notice the maps are lying in conflict with each other.
That leapt out at me when I read it.
Maybe it's just so obvious that no one feels the need to talk about it.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. I feel like people aren't paying that much attention to the way the directions are flipped in some of them. Like, I don't know.
We'll throw in a link to the episode where we talk about the West Passage more in detail. So, which is right before either of us had actually read it, but we were on the verge. But that actually sort of indirectly leads to a point. Something I do think is interesting, and again, possibly was mentioned in our cartography episode, is in Jackson's adaptation, we have a couple of instances of maps. Now, famously, there was the one that was basically introduces a, oh my God, we have to explain ourselves type thing in the Two Towers adaptation, showing where everything was. People's like, okay, so people are over here, and then Saruman's over here, and we're over here, and that was done as a little last minute cut in, and they're like, okay, let's quickly draw up a map. But I like the moments of things where we see like the brief bit where in Fellowship where Bilbo and Frodo are looking through Bilbo's book, and we see a couple instances of maps in there, and they're meant to be just simple, smaller, like location maps, and one's a redrawn version of the Shire map and things like this. So on the one hand, it's not anything new and creative. They're simply adapting what already existed and sort of, retrofitting it back to how it would have been in a Middle-earth book, type thing. But at the same time, it's interesting to see. And there's something to that. I'm thinking of fan art. There's one artist in particular whose work I really liked from the 80s and 90s on the fanzine level, which is very detailed and very interesting, but not too overwhelming. And I liked his depiction of sort of sweeping events and things like that in a sort of map-based context, which was distinct in its own thing, and was the type of like, yeah, I could see that actually being in a Middle-earth scenario of a map that they themselves might be using type thing. And it's interesting to think about that, whereas, the Atlas, Fonstad's work by default isn't that. It can't be. It is very much aiming at a much different sort of creative level. And that distinction, I think, is important just to, it's obvious, but at the same time, it is important, in the same way that we look at the atlases of our world. It's not like, one state in the United States is colored orange and then the one next to it is colored purple in real life, and that's how we tell them apart. It's sort of like, that's just, it's an invention for its creation, etc., things like that. But imagine if.
I remember being like a kid and being like, is Idaho a different color? I don't know. We had a map where Washington was green, and I was like, it's pretty green here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if California is purple on the map, is it more purple in real life? I don't know.
There's just a subtle hue.
Yeah.
Purple Mountain's Majesty. It's right there in the song, guys.
Yeah.
I was actually, like, the first time I visited California and I saw, it was sunset, and I was like, oh my God, it is, like, the mountains are purple. What's going on? And okay,
the
this
prophecy
is a very
foretold.
weird story, but I was interviewing Tim Olyphant outside on the Justified set at this moment, and I realized, I was like, oh my God, dude, the mountains are purple. He was like, yes. So this is my first time in California, man, like, as a person who remembered things, like, yeah, so.
And this is why it's important to read atlases and get a sense of travel. No, anyway.
So you know what color the state is.
To this day, I am such a, like, I don't like using Google Maps directions. I don't like having it direct me. I like to look at the map and navigate. That's why I prefer someone else be driving so that I can be the navigator. Love looking at a map.
5 miles, you're gonna turn right.
I'm so much better than Google Maps at directions.
I like to think this too, frankly, but I suppose we're veering a little off topic.
A little bit.
We're still talking about.
We're still talking about
It's still
maps.
maps. It's still maps.
But we should probably sort of wrap it up a bit
Sure,
here.
sure.
We're approaching our natural end time, so I'll throw in my own final thoughts. So yes, as I mentioned, for me, very much a soft spot, very much part of the initial rush of really getting into Tolkien properly. It's sort of bound up with that, and again, it's one of those things I was mildly surprised going back to the first time, sort of leading it through different eyes, but I'm still glad it existed. For me, at the time, I think it was deeply, deeply valuable, and now that I can see it more as the fan work it is than necessarily the definitive final word, I appreciate it still very much on that level. That's kind of my final take, really, is what it would come down to. Oriana?
It is so important to remember that it is fan art.
Yeah.
Oriana, anything further you want to add, or?
Props to Karen for doing this. I think that's amazing. Even as it didn't do that much for me, like you said, I'm very happy that it's out in the world, and what a feat.
Yeah. And she was doing this in between. She had, I think, 2 children.
Yeah.
She taught part-time at the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. I'm sorry, I cannot. My dad's from Wisconsin. I cannot say it any other. Oshkosh. And working as a physical therapist as well. Like, she had a lot going on. She still found time to do all of these things. I did have 2 final questions.
Okay.
The first one, which should be pretty quick, I think, is do you have a favorite map from this book?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I do. But Oriana, do you want to go first?
I do like her attempt to do both the flat and round Earth. There's just something about that I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that one's really nice. I think I like... It's hard for... Okay, no, I know which one it is. Her Misty Mountains map. This one right here, the 2-page one. It's sort of right in the middle, because it's sort of, the Misty Mountains as such a particular feature looms so large in so many of the different books, one way or another. And then they're key. There's the settings for key plot points in both Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. They have an element to play in the Silmarillion. It's just a sense of, okay, geologic time. So seeing the sweep and curve of it, as the way she lays it out, and all these locations along the way, from literally up, from Mount Gundabad all the way down to the final hill and things like this. It's a sense of, this place that's this presence, this huge thing you can't ignore. I kind of like that. There are other maps I could pick up, but that would be mine. That would be mine.
I think my favorite, and also least favorite, but I'll get to that in a second, is the map of Minas Tirith.
Okay.
The way it's so beautifully rendered, and seeing the winding road that is a pretty great defense mechanism.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful map. The reason it's also my least favorite is that I hate the way she drew the White Tower.
Okay, all right.
It's like, that's not my White Tower. That's not how that looks. How could you get it so wrong, Karen?
Fair enough.
But it's a beautifully rendered map. It truly is. Second question. If you were to take on some gigantic, insane, quixotic fan project like this, what would you do?
For Tolkien or for anything?
I'm going to say Tolkien specifically.
Okay, all right.
Otherwise, it's like we could be here forever.
I'm already doing it. I'm already choosing to, without... it's just for me, but choosing to, fully adapt, the Fall of Numenor into a TV series. Just working on that on my own.
Yes.
Just maybe someday I will get to ask the estate, can I do this? And maybe I'll find someone with pockets deep enough, and the Amazon show will be far enough in everyone's rearview mirror that I can actually do that. But yeah, that is my I will keep trying to do that until we don't have television anymore.
Until it's just beamed directly into our brains by little metal cubes or whatever.
Right. Can't wait. So, and as for me, this would be hard because I like to write about music, but I'm not a musician. Nonetheless, doing some sort of, there have been so many interpretations. What do Tolkien's songs sound like musically in the context? What instruments were they using and all that? We've seen representations, we've seen approximations. Without getting a sense of there would be something definitive about any of that, an actual exploration of that would be really good. And I'm not talking about getting orcs to do a a cappella chant-along version of Where There Was a Whip, There's a Way. Although imagine if. But I think something where sort of again, it would be totally fanish, but even Tolkien himself talks about literally the music of the Ainur as the central foundational myth for everything that followed, which it was right from the start. It's like a deep dive into that's not simply ye olde medievally recreation. It's sort of no, let's expand out. We have a much different vision of what the early music is like from when we were recordings and things were being written up and talked about, say, in the 1950s or 1940s versus now. I think the idea of sort of a much wider range of what is music is understood by the world a lot better, precisely due to the explosion of recordings, field recordings, deeper studies of text and all that. It's no, it doesn't just have to be this one style thing. It doesn't have to be a frilly harpsichord or a strummed lyre. There are other ways to do this.
4-part harmony.
Yeah, exactly. Let's sort of let's see what we can do here. That would be an interesting task, I think, to do, and I think there would be some room for that.
Yeah, I picture the music of the Ainu sounding like Bulgarian women's choirs.
Yeah, totally could.
I think my answer to this question is something that I don't have the patience and possibly the skill to do, but it would be kind of an atlas, but like architecture of Middle Earth. Just draw literally every building.
Yeah.
Why not?
and the challenge here, I think, would be to be like, not make it look like the Jackson movies at all.
Right,
like,
right.
what do I think Rivendell looks like?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the same way, I wouldn't want to do just like, I wouldn't want to repeat Howard Shore's themes, great as they are, but that's for that interpretation of this thing. And again, it's soundtrack music as opposed to what's actually happening on the ground. So it's not diegetic. So if anything, Plan 9 gives the group that is that did those things, not the movie. Plan 9, who were the New Zealand group that did that. Yeah, imagine if. Okay, it's time to pick the next episode topic. The choice of topic has come around to me. And this is something I've been sort of teasing in my brain for a while. And in a weird way, this topic we've just done, this subject, kind of gives me a lead into it. But I'm going to try and frame this in a particular way, because I don't want us to be seeing it as something that is actually bound up with maps or atlases, although to a degree it is that. Something I've always found very interesting with Middle-earth, with Lord of the Rings, is the sense of edges where we don't know everything, whether it's in story, whether it's in history, the things that are either, you could say axiomatic that everyone already knows but they don't have to talk about, or the things that are just sort of like dimly known or sensed, and the sense of a history that is fragmentary and partially, if not totally, lost. And that ties into the fact that we have all these, in the map of Middle-earth, and we see vague mentions of it. We have lands that are just areas that are just, barely touched on. In the Atlas, Rune is mentioned. What is Rune? Mm-hmm. What is there? Nothing. As far as we know, it's a name, but we don't know what actually is there, who lives there, if anything. What's the story there? We have the peninsula, Andrast, and that the peninsula off to the west of Gondor, where there's, barely any detail. What's there? What's going on? But also there's a sense of deeper history. We were talking about the Wayne writers earlier. It's sort of like, well, who were they? We don't know anything about them beyond the fact they rode Waynes. Great, and all that. So there are these hints of things that we only know in fragmentary senses. They're part of what's there, but things are lost. There's details that are lost. And ever since I first read Lord of the Rings, and there was one particular thing on the map I thought was like, what does that mean? And then I read the book and I learned more about another location too. And I was sort of like, oh, what's that all about? It's something. What's going on here? And so I want us to sort of like, in the same way that Oriana brought up the idea of monarchy through the lens of Aragorn, I would like us to think about the sense of like lost societies, lost realms, and their remains through the lens specifically, but not just related to that. We can take the same direction we want, of Arnor and Angmar. The two, arguably the two most influential, if you want to call it that, things on the narrative of lands and societies that are no longer there, but the impact plays out forever and shapes a lot of what is Lord of the Rings, and the sense of like, we're going over the bones of these societies in a very particular way, and with very interesting moments, especially in Fellowship of the Ring, but not just there. So that will be for next time. So, and again, take this any way we want. I have some ideas, but we can take it any way we want. So, all right. Well, with that said, thank you all very much for listening. Yes, 75 episodes, as we mentioned, milestone. It's a milestone. We won't deny it. So, and we thank you all. It's they keep adding up as we keep doing more of these. It's all good. And we will have more for you next time for sure. Until then, as always, again, thank you so much for listening. Megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater is, of course, our webpage. The episode guide is linked there. You can also find By-The-Bywater on Blue Sky. You can find us individually there as well. Various other social media spots. If we haven't mentioned in a while, we do want to say, one, do consider joining our Patreon for Megaphonic, because that way you can join our Discord, where we all are posting memes, but also talking about other things, a chance to ask us about the episodes, stuff like that. We always appreciate the feedback. And speaking of feedback, hey, if you get the chance, leave us reviews, whether it's on Apple or somewhere else or all that. Just, if you like what you hear, we always appreciate it. It gives us an idea of what people are reacting to for the episodes and what we do, and it's something we value. So by all means, please do that, or you can also email us at bythebywater@gmail.com. That's about it for now. We will talk to you next time, and until then, We'll see you.